I always thought the emergency antenna on my roof was just a quiet little safety measure, like a fire extinguisher you never want to use. Tornado alerts, power grid failures, sudden storms cutting phone service, that kind of thing. I live a little outside town, on the edge of a neighborhood with more HOA drama than actual emergencies, but the antenna made me feel prepared. Strong signal, direct connection to emergency channels, and most importantly, absolutely zero effect on anyone else's life. At least, that's what I believed until Karen moved in. She was the kind of woman who behaved like the main character in a badly written reality show. Perfect blowout hair, tennis skirt as a uniform, sunglasses glued permanently above the eyebrows for maximum judgment. Her house sat across the fence line from mine, and the first time she saw me adjusting the antenna connection, she screamed from her backyard like I was erecting a cell tower on a preschool. "Those things cause cancer," she yelled, marching toward the fence with a gardening glove held like a protest sign. "You can't just install a death ray without asking your neighbors." I tried to explain calmly that it was a passive receiver, not a transmitter. It couldn't cause radiation any more than a tree could. But logic wasn't invited to her argument. She stomped off with a promise that the HOA will hear about this. The funny thing? My house wasn't even part of the HOA. I bought before the subdivision formed. Legally exempt. Best decision of my life, or so I thought. Within a week of her tirade, she began her campaign. First came the letters. Hand-delivered, unsigned, printed in Comic Sans. They accused me of violating neighborhood aesthetics with my sky spike, and suggested it be removed for community wellness. Then came the group texts sent to neighbors, adding me to threads without permission, claiming I had installed illegal radio jamming equipment. People asked me if I was a secret pirate radio operator. I told them I wasn't cool enough for that. Still, the antenna stayed. Everything seemed manageable. Then the power outage hit. A storm rolled in while I was at work, and when I drove home, every house on the street sat dark. Even cell towers went down. Trees were blocking roads, emergency lines overloaded. But my antenna picked up the county's emergency broadcast channel clearly. They gave instructions for safe water and where to find temporary electricity hubs. My neighbors gathered in my lit living room, my backup generator running, to hear updates. They thanked me. Some even apologized for the rumors Karen started. Karen never came. Instead, she called the police on me, saying I was stealing the neighborhood's power and causing interference. The officer who knocked on my door after midnight looked exhausted and embarrassed. He apologized and left without further issue once he realized the situation. But Karen wasn't deterred. She saw that emergency night as proof that I had too much authority, too much usefulness, and that made me dangerous in her world. Spring came, and with it, Karen's next mission. She printed flyers claiming antennas like mine attracted lightning and could blow up homes. She told parents their children would get brain tumors if they biked past my driveway. The more I ignored her, the more dramatic she became. The day before everything erupted, I was on my roof checking the cable line when I saw Karen pointing at me while talking to a couple from the HOA board. They kept shaking their heads, and she kept stabbing the air with her finger like she was painting them a picture in rage. I waved and smiled. She glared back like I'd committed a felony by acknowledging my existence. Late that night, I heard a clanking noise outside. Something metallic. I assumed raccoons knocking over a trash can. I checked the windows but saw nothing. I went back to bed, blissfully unaware of what she was doing on the other side of darkness. The next morning, I knew. I walked outside to find my emergency antenna drooping like a chopped tree, the cable sliced clean through. A hacksaw lay hidden poorly beneath a shrub, still warm from use. The bracket holding the antenna to its support beam dangled by one loose screw. My backup connection to the outside world, gone. Not damaged by weather. Sabotaged. There was only one person in the world who hated that antenna enough to commit midnight vandalism. I took photos of the damage, the saw, the cut cable. I was thinking about calling the sheriff. Then I heard sirens approaching. Several cars rolled into the street. Lights flashing, radios crackling. And then, most surreal of all, officers rushed straight toward my house. I stepped off the porch with my hands open, confused, and one of them immediately shouted for me to stop. Karen appeared behind them, arms crossed triumphantly, fake gasp ready to launch. That's him. He's the one who tampered with my home security system. He tried to climb my roof and cut wires connected to my house. The officer asked Karen where exactly these wires were located. She pointed at my roof. At the antenna. At something that was unmistakably mine. I spoke calmly, explaining what actually happened and showing them the photos I'd taken. The officers began to exchange glances, doubt creeping in. Then the lead officer asked Karen a simple question that changed the tone instantly. "Ma'am, did you witness him on your property?" Karen froze. She opened and closed her mouth like a goldfish struggling with air. "Well, not exactly. But everyone knows he thinks he's above the rules. His little tower proves it." The officer sighed, massaged his forehead, and asked me to show him where the antenna's base sat. I walked him 10 feet from my house. Well within my yard. My property. My legal domain. Karen wasn't ready to give up. "It causes health problems. I read online that." "Ma'am," the officer interrupted. "He has every right to have this equipment on his own house. And from what I'm seeing, someone has clearly cut through it deliberately." Her confidence cracked. She tried one more line. "You're letting a criminal manipulate you." The officer turned to me quietly. "Would you like to file a vandalism report?" Karen sputtered like a kettle left too long on the stove. She started shouting about community values and safety threats and conspiracies. The officer radioed his team to clear out. They left without arresting her. Without even giving her the validation she wanted. I expected her to be embarrassed. To maybe calm down and rethink the situation. Instead, she doubled down. She started claiming that I had installed the antenna as espionage equipment. That I was surveilling neighbors and selling footage to advertisers. She wrote rants on Facebook, tagging local groups and demanding action. The HOA board tried to intervene, reminding her that I wasn't even under their authority. That only made her angrier. Now it wasn't about an antenna. It was about winning. She wanted power, control, dominance. And the more she failed, the more she escalated. I replaced the cable and restored the antenna within a day. Stronger bolts, reinforced bracket, lock-protected access. I thought maybe that would deter her. But Karen wasn't just stubborn. She was a ticking bomb of entitlement. And the fuse had been lit. Because she had no idea that vandalizing that antenna didn't just hurt my property. It jeopardized lives. And when the next real emergency hit, the fallout would expose everything she tried to destroy. The morning after the police incident, I expected gossip. I expected Karen stalking the property line, throwing passive-aggressive stares like ninja stars. What I didn't expect was the HOA president waiting on my porch holding a coffee cup and what appeared to be a stack of official papers. His name was Richard, a reasonable man most of the time, though he had that HOA aura that suggested he'd fine you if your tulips bloomed the wrong shade of yellow. He cleared his throat like he was practicing a speech. "We were hoping to chat if you have a minute." I invited him inside, mostly because I was curious how involved he was willing to get in Karen's crusade. He placed the documents on my table and explained that Karen had attempted to pass an emergency rule banning all external antennas, towers, and roof-mounted infrastructure in the community. She cited health impacts, lightning threats, wartime communications risks, and even psychological damage to children who must see such structures daily. I scanned the papers and couldn't help laughing. The rule had been unanimously rejected, but Karen claimed she would take this all the way to the county. The HOA wanted to assure me they weren't siding with her. They respected my property rights, but Richard's tone shifted when he asked why the antenna was so important. He had the same concern many people had. If you prepare for emergencies, you must be paranoid. So I told him the truth. I used to be a volunteer firefighter. I'd seen people cut off from help during storms or fires because communication lines died. The antenna wasn't a hobby. It was my own insurance against helplessness. Plus, I was part of a community emergency communication group. During disasters, we relayed information between first responders and stranded citizens. It wasn't glamorous, just necessary. Richard nodded slowly, impressed but cautious. Then he dropped one more surprise. She's building a petition. She plans to get signatures to force a legal mandate for removal. She thinks she's rallying the entire street. You might want to prepare. Prepare. I was already way ahead of him. After he left, I brewed fresh coffee and went to review the footage from my security cameras. Karen had cut the antenna cable out of view, but the motion alerts captured her creeping across the fence line and sneaking behind my toolshed. Hoodie, gloves, the whole cartoon villain starter pack. I saved every angle. Evidence was like revenge. Best served later, preferably ice-cold and in high definition. I didn't want to start a war. I just wanted to protect myself, legally and practically. But Karen wanted a battlefield, and she was already advancing. By evening, doorbells chimed along the street like a synchronized alarm. Karen and her teenage daughter knocked on every house, clipboards in hand. I stayed inside, lights off, watching the spectacle from my living room window. Every time someone opened the door, Karen launched into a loud whisper lecture, waving her arms toward my house, like she was warning them of a serial killer. Some neighbors nodded sympathetically but refused to sign. Others politely shut the door. A couple seemed tempted but asked questions Karen clearly wasn't prepared to answer. Meanwhile, her daughter rolled her eyes, though she scribbled aggressively whenever one person finally gave in. She looked mortified to be a sidekick in her mother's crusade. The whole process was almost funny, until someone genuinely disturbed approached me later that night. Her name was Georgia. Sweet older lady. She knocked gently and explained that Karen told her the antenna could interfere with her pacemaker. Georgia was nearly in tears, thinking she might have a medical crisis just from standing outside. I reassured her with clear facts, showed her articles, demonstrated how the antenna only received signals, didn't broadcast them. I even gave her the number of a cardiologist friend she could call for confirmation. By the time she left, she hugged me and apologized for believing Karen's nonsense. But the damage was done. Fear spreads faster than fact. The next day was HOA Community Walk-Around, where board members inspected properties. They ignored my house, of course, since I wasn't in their jurisdiction. But Karen walked with them anyway, pointing at imaginary infrastructure violations only she could see. Like a tour guide leading a paranoia safari. After her attempt failed again, she returned home with a rage that felt visible from across the street. She slammed doors, kicked a lawn chair, and let out a scream that startled a flock of birds into the sky. Later that night, she started her own emergency broadcast. A bullhorn. At 9:30 p.m. She stood at the edge of her driveway, shouting about dangerous radiation and illegal surveillance. Some neighbors yelled at her to shut up. Others filmed her for future meme potential. I stood in my driveway with my arms folded, just watching. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Her meltdown was a loud public confession of defeat. But Karen wasn't stupid. She was vindictive. And vindictive people don't quit, they escalate. The first sign came 2 mornings later when I woke up to find a large orange sticker plastered on my garage door. Warning. Illegal technology installed. Compliance required. Property inspection mandated. At the bottom, she had signed it HOA Enforcement Lead, a role she absolutely did not possess. I peeled it off and laughed, but anger smoldered under the humor. Property. Inspection. Mandated. She was now trying to create authority from thin air. Later that afternoon, I caught her standing under the antenna again, but this time she had backup. A man in sunglasses holding a measuring tape and what looked like a clipboard full of printed legal forms. She didn't see me approach. She was too busy pointing upward and barking orders. "That metal thing throws off the entire neighborhood aesthetic," she said. "Measure how high it is. We'll use the violation code about structures exceeding roofline." The man obeyed without question. He didn't even glance around. He was a contractor, not an official. She had hired someone to fabricate rule violations. I stepped out into view. The contractor jumped. Karen didn't. She glared at me with the smug certainty of someone who thinks consequences don't apply to her. "You're trespassing again," I said calmly. Karen raised her chin. "We're within legal inspection right. The HOA will enforce compliance." I pointed at the survey marker on the ground. They were 3 feet into my yard. The contractor slowly backed away. Karen stayed put. "You're abusing people with your tech tower," she snapped. "Normal families shouldn't have to suffer because you think you're special." I didn't answer. Silence was more powerful. She huffed and stormed off with her sidekick measuring for nothing but air. That night, something shifted in me. I wasn't just protecting a piece of metal. I was protecting truth from being swallowed by delusion. So I decided it was time to collect every bit of ammunition she had gifted me. I filed a police report for the vandalism, turning over all the camera evidence. The officer recognized Karen's face immediately and promised to follow up. I printed copies of the HOA's written acknowledgement that they had no authority over my property. I contacted a lawyer who loved property disputes the way chefs love butter. While I prepared everything legally, Karen launched her next phase publicly. She held a neighborhood meeting in her front yard, complete with a banner reading "Stop the Antenna Threat." 20 chairs arranged in rows, only 5 filled. Her daughter sat in the back scrolling her phone, uninspired. Karen gave a speech about community values and electromagnetic terrorism. She even tried to cry at one point. The performance was spectacular but poorly attended. Still, a couple of neighbors looked uncertain. Fear works even when logic fails. When the meeting ended, Karen spotted me on my porch and yelled across the street. "This is only the beginning. I'm winning people to the right side of history." I smiled and waved like she'd just told a joke. It infuriated her. But somewhere inside her yelling, a hidden truth shimmered. She wasn't trying to protect anyone. She was terrified of losing control. That fear was gasoline, and the fire was spreading. The county had just issued a new severe weather alert that week. High winds forecasted. Flood risks rising. Power grid unstable from previous storm damage. Everyone should have been preparing for a real emergency. Instead, Karen was manufacturing a fake one. And when disaster struck again, everything she'd done would come crashing down, not because of me. Because reality didn't care about her war. Her sabotage had already set the stage. And the next emergency wouldn't just expose her lies. It would put real lives on the line. The storm was predicted for days, but most people brushed it off. "Just rain," they said. "We've had worse." But I watched the cloud formations roll in, dark and layered like bruises spreading across the sky. I checked the emergency channels. The antenna fed me real-time data. Flooding concerns, possible bridge closures, shelters prepping early. I made sure my generator was fueled and tested. I shared warnings with the neighbors who asked. Not everyone listened, but several remembered the last outage and took precautions. Karen, meanwhile, spent the day hanging more posters about antenna danger. Not umbrellas. Not emergency kit. Posters. The wind kicked up in the late afternoon, snapping branches and rattling gutters. Karen stood in her yard lecturing a pair of uninterested pedestrians. She shouted over the wind, claiming the storm was caused by electromagnetic pollution. I didn't need to hear her to know every word was nonsense, but the spectacle was something to behold. As everyone else tied down patio furniture, she was still trying to win her imaginary war. The rain arrived violently, pivoting from drizzle to sideways sheets of water in seconds. Lightning tore across the sky like a jagged threat. One strike hit close enough to shake the windows. The power flickered, then died completely. The neighborhood fell into a dark hush broken only by the wind. My emergency lights clicked on automatically. The antenna signal held steady. I grabbed my handheld radio, switched to the emergency channel, and heard chaos. Streets flooding. A road collapsed. A tree taking down a power line near the school. Dispatchers scrambled to triage a dozen different crises. I stared across the street. Karen's house was pitch black. Minutes later, pounding on my door made me flinch. I opened it to find 3 neighbors soaked and panicked. Their phones were dead. Their home alarms had gone offline. They needed to know if the shelters were opening yet. One had a diabetic husband who couldn't keep his insulin refrigerated if the power stayed off. I guided them inside, updated them on the situation. They warmed up, calmed down, thanked me repeatedly. As they left, they promised to pass along the information. Karen still didn't appear. Instead, not 10 minutes later, a flashlight beam swept across my living room windows. Then comes the voice, shrill and accusing. I know you're doing something illegal in there. You're hijacking emergency frequencies. I stepped onto the porch. Karen was soaked, hair clinging to her forehead, eyes wild from either fear or fury. Maybe both. She jabbed her flashlight toward the antenna like it was a weapon. This storm isn't natural, she hissed. Your machine is interfering with the atmosphere. I kept calm. Karen, go inside. The storm's dangerous. She took a step closer. Turn it off. I'm receiving life-saving communication, I told her. People need updates. People are scared. That's not your job, she screamed. You're turning the neighborhood against me. A branch whipped across the street, slamming into a transformer box with a deafening crack. A shower of sparks erupted, and then deeper darkness swallowed the area. Karen shrieked like lightning had personally offended her. I tried again. Go home. Shelter. This isn't the time. She pointed her flashlight at my face. You think you're helping? You're making it worse. I'm calling the police again. She turned and ran back to her house, slipping once in the mud before disappearing inside. I exhaled, rubbing my forehead. The emergency broadcast updated. Flooding was rising faster than expected, and one of the main access roads was likely to wash out. More neighbors came to my door for information. I helped each one. And then came Georgia. She was leaning on her cane, trembling from the cold. My pacemaker monitor isn't working, she said, voice barely audible. I didn't know who else to ask. I wrapped her in a dry blanket and guided her inside. I checked the emergency feed for updates on medical services. Ambulances were being dispatched selectively due to road hazard. For now, she just needed to rest and stay warm. I made her tea and eased her nerves with quiet conversation. While we talked, I noticed blue and red lights refracting through sheets of rain outside. Here we go again. An officer knocked firmly. I opened the door and he sighed. Not the tired sigh of a man inconvenienced, but the resigned sigh of a man who knows stupidity thrives even in storms. Sir, he said, we received another call about illegal signal interference originating from this address. I gestured to Georgia in the armchair. I'm providing emergency communication access for neighbors. People need updates. The officer nodded. I can see that. We're stretched thin out here, so I'll make this quick. Karen stormed onto my porch once more, wearing a rain-soaked bathrobe and clutching her phone as if it were a badge. Arrest him. He's making the storm worse. He's emitting electrical weather. The officer stared at her like she'd just admitted to being the storm itself. Ma'am, that's not a thing. She pointed wildly. He's manipulating frequencies. He probably caused the transformer explosion. The officer turned to me. Do you have documentation for the equipment? I handed over laminated copies of federal guidelines, proof of my certification, and confirmation that the antenna was a passive device. He reviewed them quickly. Thank you. Everything checks out. Karen's jaw dropped. She had expected applause. Instead she got facts. I want him cited, she barked. He's operating a disaster scam. And why is that woman in his house? What is he doing to her? Georgia stood shakily, clutching her blanket. He's helping me, dear. Something you could try sometime. The officer thanked me, apologized again, and turned to leave. That's when a frantic radio call crackled through his mic. A family was trapped in a flash flood near Old Mill Road. Rescue crews needed support, but communications were failing in the area. I can relay, I said immediately. My signal reaches the monitoring station. The officer paused. His eyes sharpened with urgency. Can you do that now? I nodded and grabbed my portable unit. I repeated the distress call clearly and directly to the emergency channel. They replied in seconds. Rescue vehicles were rerouted. The family was eventually saved. Karen watched the entire thing. Her face contorted. She realized that in front of witnesses, police, neighbor, and storm, my antenna had proven its worth. And worse, I was the hero, not her. She stormed back to her house with a fury so intense I could almost see steam rising in the rain. I thought that might be the turning point. That maybe, just maybe, she'd see reality. But people like Karen don't see proof. They see threats to their ego. The storm calmed by dawn. Sunlight revealed damage everywhere. Fences torn down, roads split, yards flooded. But people were alive. Homes were standing. And my antenna had made a difference. Neighbors thanked me openly, some even apologizing for previously believing Karen's nonsense. They brought food, offered help, shared gratitude. Karen saw every act of appreciation as a personal attack. I caught her watching from her window, jaw clenched. Her daughter sat behind her rubbing her eyes, exhausted from the storm, or from living with entitlement as a parent. Later that afternoon, the police called. They wanted Karen to come in for questioning about the vandalism case. The officer said, "She'll be angry." He didn't need to tell me. Around sunset, a contractor truck returned to Karen's driveway. Two men began hauling tools out, power drills, extension cords, metal brackets. As I watched, they climbed onto Karen's roof. Then I saw what she was doing. Karen was installing her own antenna. Not a small one. A bigger one. The director's cut of hypocrisy. She barked orders from the lawn. Mine is for neighborhood protection. Totally different purpose than his spy equipment. Every lie fueled her self-importance like gasoline to arrogance. Neighbors gathered, whispering. Even her daughter looked ashamed, arms wrapped tight around herself. When the contractors finished, the monstrosity towered above her house like a middle finger aimed directly at me. Karen crossed the street, smug triumph in every step. She stopped at my property line, smiling with her whole face as if she'd won a Nobel Prize. "Now we're even," she announced. "Except mine is legal. And yours still needs to be removed." I stared at her antenna, a roof-mounted skyscraper of entitlement. Before I could respond, a police cruiser rolled up again. The same officer stepped out, holding paperwork. "Ma'am," he said, "you're being served a notice of investigation for property damage. And you filed false complaints against a legally installed emergency unit. We need to discuss that." Her victory died instantly. I watched her expression collapse like her worldview had been made of wet cardboard. This feud was no longer about neighborhood aesthetic. Karen had declared a communications war. And she didn't yet understand that she'd just given me the most powerful leverage of all. She thought something had ended. But this was only the beginning. Karen being served notice should have been the last straw for her. Most people, when confronted with the possibility of criminal charges, take a breath, maybe do some light self-reflection, and consider dialing down the chaos. But Karen wasn't most people. She was a volcano that erupted specifically out of spite. Consequences only made her more determined to rewrite reality as she wished it to be. The very next morning, I found a stack of freshly printed flyers stuffed into my mailbox. Same Comic Sans font, but this time they looked more official. emergency alert symbols, county logos she had definitely copied from somewhere, and the bold headline, Fraud Alert. The document accused me of running an illegal communications business. According to Karen, I charged neighbors money during storms for access to exclusive rescue channels. I had apparently been fined by the FCC 9 times, owned a secret bunker underground, and was planning a signal coup. The coup part was a decent twist, I'll give her that. Before I even finished reading, I heard the sound of her bullhorn crackling to life across the street. She stood next to her newly installed antenna, which now sported reflective stickers and a laminated sign reading Approved Emergency Transmissions. She paced in front of her house with a swagger that suggested she had been appointed sheriff of the sky. My phone buzzed every few minutes with messages from the neighborhood group chat, screenshots of her posts on Facebook, comments arguing back and forth. Some people believed her, because fear is loud and facts are boring. By noon, a different kind of knock hit my door. This one was sharper. Official. 2 men wearing ID badges introduced themselves as county inspectors. Apparently someone reported that I was operating unauthorized communications infrastructure. Karen watched from her driveway, arms crossed, waiting for validation like a toddler after throwing paint on a wall. I invited the inspectors inside. Unlike the police officers, these 2 were actually relevant to my equipment. They asked technical questions. I answered them calmly and clearly. I gave them every document they requested. They inspected the antenna wiring, the grounding, the radio unit. They nodded, made notes, asked follow-up questions. Professional, neutral, thorough. After an hour, the decision was clear. Everything was legal. Everything was compliant. The inspectors turned toward Karen, who was already marching toward us. "Well," she demanded, "you shutting him down?" The lead inspector tucked his notes away. "His setup is fully authorized. Nothing violates ordinance." Karen's face tightened like someone closing a fist. "Then shut down mine." He copied me. Copying her. Let that sink in for a moment. The inspector raised a brow. "When was yours installed?" "Yesterday," she declared proudly, as if that helped. "And do you have a permit for transmitting equipment?" She blinked. "I don't need a permit. It's for the safety of the community." "Ma'am, transmitting antennas require certification, especially if they could interfere with aviation, emergency services, or public utilities." Karen stared like he'd spoken in alien language. "It's decorative," she blurted. "And spiritual." Decorative and spiritual. The new legal defense strategy. The inspectors informed her she needed to apply for permits immediately and undergo signal testing. Karen insisted her antenna was non-functional, just a symbol of protection. The inspectors exchanged looks. They would be back with measurement equipment. This was all amusing in a tragicomic way, but then the next twist dropped. Later that day, the officer handling the vandalism case called me. They had collected statements, reviewed the footage, and were ready to proceed with property damage charges. He mentioned Karen seemed surprisingly unconcerned, which made me wonder what she thought her next move was. The answer arrived that evening. I was sitting on the porch repairing a piece of fencing when a squad of SUVs descended on our street like a tactical invasion. Officers poured out, handing out flyers door to door. The neighbors gathered in small crowds to read them. Words spread quickly and whispers turned into gasps. A convicted scammer in the region, someone who had posed as emergency personnel during tornado seasons, had resurfaced. Fraudulent equipment, illegal communications, endangered lives for profit. Karen had filed a tip. She had reported that I was that scammer. Not similar to him. Literally him. The officers approached with caution. The lead one looked embarrassed to be there. "Sir," he said slowly, "we received an anonymous report claiming you've been impersonating safety personnel and running an unlawful emergency service here." I exhaled through my nose. "Anonymous, huh?" He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. I showed ID. Employment records. Background history. Heck, I even pulled up my old firefighter documentation. The officers compared my face to the scammer's mugshot. The scammer looked like he had been assembled out of leftover villain parts. Zero resemblance. After 20 minutes of wasted time, they wished me a safe night and drove away. Across the street, Karen was filming. She zoomed in dramatically, narrating the entire event to her Facebook audience. "This is how corruption hides," she screeched. "He's tricking law enforcement. But I see the truth." Eventually, officers told her to stop interfering and threatened a fine if she continued. Most people would pause here, realize the hole they dug was deep enough to hit magma. But Karen? She grabbed a shovel and demanded a backhoe. The next morning, county inspectors returned. They climbed Karen's roof and measured. They tested radio emissions, and discovered that something in her setup was indeed transmitting interference. She blamed me. Obviously. The inspector asked a simple question. "Who wired this?" She pointed to her daughter. The girl looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. "I didn't do anything," she muttered. The inspectors traced the power line and found a cheaply attached signal booster, plugged into a random outlet, wires dangling like a middle school science project. The kind of thing that absolutely could interfere with emergency channels. They ordered it shut down immediately. Karen tried to argue. They cited code. She tried to cry. They cited penalty fines. She tried to threaten them with the HOA again. They cited laughter. She stormed inside, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For the first time, the neighborhood saw her clearly. Not as a crusader. Not as a leader. But as a danger. One who would risk everyone else's safety just to win an imaginary argument. I should have felt triumphant. But the air around me felt heavy. When someone's whole ego is at stake, they don't retreat when cornered. They attack. I had reinforced my antenna. Secured my evidence. Lawyered up. But I underestimated one thing. Karen wasn't just trying to remove the antenna anymore. She was trying to destroy my life. That night, just past midnight, I was woken by a loud metallic clank. Instantly alert, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped quietly toward the back door. Rain had begun again, light but persistent. Thunder rumbled far off like a warning. There, at the fence line, crouched a figure, holding wire cutters, aiming for the freshly repaired antenna cable. Karen. This time, she wasn't hiding. No hoodie. No gloves. Just raw fury. "What are you doing?" I asked, voice calm but cold. She jerked upward, startled, then recovered into a scowl. "Protecting the neighborhood. If the county won't shut you down, I will." I stepped forward. "Touch that cable and I file charges tonight." She waved the cutters like a weapon. "You can't stop me. You're a liar. A criminal. A fake hero." She lunged toward the cable. "Karen, stop," I demanded, but she pulled the cutters together with everything she had. And the world changed. A sudden flash lit up the yard. A sharp pop split the air. The cutters sparked violently. Karen screamed and dropped them, stumbling backward into the mud. The grounded lightning rod system I had installed worked exactly as designed. The electrical discharge never touched my house, but it scared the truth out of her. She stared up at the antenna, terrified. She had tried to shut down the only equipment capable of helping during storms. She had almost electrocuted herself because she didn't understand what she was fighting. I called emergency services. For her. Because regardless of how much she hated me, she was a human being in danger. Paramedics checked her. She was shaken but unharmed. She glared at me the entire time, hatred replacing any hint of gratitude. The officer on scene looked exhausted. "Ma'am, you can't keep doing this. You could have died." Her response made my skin crawl. He did this to me. Not the cutters. Not her choices. Me. As the ambulance drove away, the officer lingered. "She's unstable," he said quietly. "We're escalating the case." I thanked him. But as he left, Karen's daughter stood alone on the sidewalk. She looked at me with a different expression. fear, shame, desperation. "She's going to get worse," the girl whispered. Then she turned and ran inside. Thunder rolled overhead again. Karen had just survived a self-inflicted shock, and she saw herself as the victim. The storm outside wasn't the real threat anymore. The real storm was living across the street, and it was far from over. In the days after Karen nearly electrocuted herself, I hoped that shock would have rattled loose some misplaced screws in her head. Maybe she would back down, realize she wasn't the guardian of the galaxy she imagined. But if anything, it rearranged her delusions into something far more dangerous. Now she believed she was under attack. She believed I wasn't just a neighborhood enemy. I was a personal threat to her existence. And a person who thinks they are defending themselves will justify any retaliation they can dream of. The police followed up with her. Inspectors continued processing permits and violations. Neighbors avoided her. But Karen didn't retreat. She plotted. I could see it in the way she paced her yard at dusk, clutching her phone, whisper-yelling into it like she was giving commands from a bunker. Her daughter barely left the house, except to retrieve groceries delivered to the porch. Her husband, who I rarely saw before, was suddenly gone entirely. Work trip? Divorce escape mission? No one knew. I checked the antenna regularly. Every bolt secure. Every cable protected. It stood tall, unbothered, ready for the next emergency. And then one afternoon, the next emergency arrived. Not a storm. Not a blackout. A real emergency. Fire. The smell hit first, thick and sharp. Then the shouting. I ran from my backyard and saw flames licking the side of George's house. A shed had caught fire and spread too fast. The wind pushed smoke toward the street. Neighbors panicked. Someone screamed for help. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from my garage and sprinted across lawns, yelling for people to stay clear. A few neighbors joined me with hoses. We kept the flames at bay while firefighters rushed in with sirens screaming. My emergency channel connection had already alerted dispatch faster than anyone's phones could. Georgia was safe, carried out by paramedic. The fire was contained before reaching her living room. The chief clapped my shoulder, thanking me for a fast response. Neighbors cheered. Relief washed through the street like a wave of light after days of darkness. Karen stood watching from her porch. Not cheering. Not relieved. Furious. Because I had helped again. Because the antenna had proven its worth again. Because reality had chosen me to be useful, and she couldn't stand the insult of it. That night, she screamed at her daughter for half an hour. Everyone heard. Her voice cracked with every rant. Her daughter cried. Something had finally broken inside that house, but the break wasn't healing. It was spreading. The next morning, a new sign stood in Karen's yard. Community Safety Committee Headquarters. Beneath it sat a folding table covered in pamphlet. Karen had dressed like a FEMA commander cosplaying at a comic convention. She wore a reflective vest, a walkie-talkie clipped to her shoulder, and a pair of aviators too large for her face. A clipboard sat under her arm like it was a sword she could wield. She patrolled the sidewalk, stopping neighbors to give them mandatory safety briefings about communication threat. She held up diagrams printed off conspiracy forums, pointing at arrows circling my antenna with skull drawings. You could see the fatigue in everyone's posture. They wanted her to leave them alone. But Karen treated every eye roll as fuel. She accused anyone who doubted her of being brainwashed by my signal influence. I ignored her. Not out of weakness. Out of strategy. Her anger needed me to feed it. I starved it instead. My silence made her unravel faster. Because she couldn't win a war if I refused to step onto the battlefield. That night, long after most neighbors had gone to bed, I saw blue lights approaching again. The same officer stepped out, holding a clipboard. He sighed before speaking. Karen had filed a restraining order request against me, claiming I had targeted her with directed energy. The judge rejected it in under 10 minutes, and the officer apologized for bothering me yet again. He looked toward Karen's dark house and lowered his voice. "We're referring her for a mental health evaluation soon. Be careful until then." I thanked him, but caution was already my constant companion. I reinforced my cameras, double-checked every lock, installed motion sensors that alerted me immediately if anyone approached the antenna again. The lawyer I hired was assembling a polished case. Vandalism, harassment, false reports, attempting to sabotage emergency infrastructure. Enough to make Karen wish she had simply stayed inside and watched cable TV instead of trying to remove mine. A few peaceful days passed. Karen remained inside, windows closed, blinds drawn. I caught glimpses of her occasionally, pacing quickly back and forth. Maybe she was finally losing momentum. I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Then came the night that erased any illusion of calm. At 3:47 a.m., my motion sensor alert jolted me awake. I checked the camera feed. A figure in dark clothing moved quickly across my yard, heading straight for the antenna. For a split second I assumed it was Karen again. But something was different. No hesitation. No clumsy dramatics. Clean motions, practiced purpose. This wasn't rage. This was intent. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside quietly, flashlight ready. The figure already had tools in hand, working swiftly at the base of the antenna. I flicked on the light. It wasn't Karen. It was her daughter. She froze, eyes wide, tears streaming. When she saw me, she dropped the wire cutters like they were burning. She whispered a trembling apology so quiet the wind almost stole it away. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I asked her what she was doing. She shook uncontrollably. She said if I don't help her win, she'll lose everything. She can't lose. She doesn't know how. The girl broke down completely, sobbing into her palms. "Please don't call the police. I just wanted her to stop yelling." I lowered the flashlight. This wasn't an enemy. This was collateral damage. A teenager trapped inside a war that wasn't hers. I told her to go home and that I wouldn't press charges. She ran across the street, slipping once before disappearing inside her house. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. Because Karen had escalated beyond personal vendetta. She was forcing a child into her madness. She was turning her daughter into a weapon. And that crossed a line even the most patient person can't ignore. The next morning, I made a decision. I printed the vandalism evidence. All the false reports. Videos of Karen trespassing. The bullhorn incidents. The contractor harassment. Every scrap of proof. I submitted everything in a thick, beautiful packet to my lawyer and the sheriff. Then I filed a restraining order. Not for me. For her daughter. The girl deserved protection from the storm she lived inside. When officers arrived to serve the paperwork, Karen lost whatever grip she still had on sanity. She burst from her house like a grenade, screaming accusations about conspiracies, government cover-ups, and emergency scams. When they tried to calm her, she shoved one of them hard enough that he reached for handcuffs. Karen fought. She swung. She spit. She shrieked like a siren made of pure hate. They arrested her. Her daughter watched from the doorway. No tears. No panic. Just relief. The silence of someone who has been given permission to breathe for the first time in years. As the cruiser pulled away, Karen's voice echoed into the street. "You haven't won. You'll regret this. Everyone will see the truth." Neighbors watched quietly. Nobody defended her. Nobody looked confused. Everyone finally understood. She wasn't protecting them. She was endangering them. I took the deepest breath I'd had in months. I thought maybe this would finally end everything. Karen would get help. The street would find peace. The antenna would live in quiet utility again. But as Karen disappeared into the distance, a final twist rattled through the emergency channel in my hand. A major communications outage had hit the entire county. Emergency services were blind. My antenna was the only active receiver left. And Karen had been cut off at the very moment the world needed information the most. Her chaos wasn't done. It was about to go statewide. When the emergency broadcast crackled with static and went silent, I felt a cold weight drop into my stomach. The county's communication backbone was down. Cell towers had failed entirely. Even landlines weren't connecting. For the first time in decades, emergency coordinators were flying blind. And the only reason I knew was because my antenna, my supposedly evil, neighborhood-destroying antenna, was still online, receiving a thin but steady stream from a federal relay outside the affected region. I was suddenly the last node standing. I radioed to confirm the situation. They gave me quick details. A relay station fire had taken down half the grid and the other half was overloaded. First responders were scattered, unable to coordinate. People were trapped in flooded roads. A nursing home had no power and no communication. There were concerns about gas leaks from storm damage. They gave me a list of priority addresses. They needed me to be their eyes, their voice, their signal. I didn't hesitate. I strapped a radio to my belt, grabbed a spare power supply, and set up a relay in my living room. I called neighbors to check on elderly residents. I relayed messages back to the emergency network. The house became a command post, not dramatic, not heroic, just necessary. A handful of neighbors rushed over to help. They took shifts monitoring the scanner, jotting notes, updating me. It was chaotic but organized. Everyone worked with a kind of urgency that made you forget this was a suburban street and not a crisis center. Hours passed. The sun rose, painting destruction in sharp morning light. Fallen trees, abandoned cars, people waving desperately from flooded porches. Each call I relayed sent responders to another rescue. Every update mattered. Every minute counted. Then a sudden knock. Not frantic, controlled. I opened the door, expecting another neighbor asking how they could help. Instead, I saw Karen, released on bail, still wrapped in entitlement-like armor. Not handcuffed, not humbled, just furious. Her hair was wild, her clothes mismatched, and her eyes blazed like a prophet convinced the apocalypse proved her right. "You caused this," she said, stepping inside without permission. "You broke the communication system so they depend on you. You're pretending to be the hero, but you're the real threat." I stood between her and the equipment. "Karen, emergency services need this channel. People could die." She shook her head rapidly, breath quickening, voice trembling like a building about to collapse. "You're not fooling me. I know what you're doing. You're taking over. Installing yourself as leader. But I built my antenna too. Mine can save people. Mine is the beacon of truth." I realized with horror where this was going. "You're not touching that," I said. Her lips curled into a twisted attempt at a smile. "I already did." She had cut something. Disabled something. Sabotaged something. Not here. At her house. Her antenna. Her cable. Her power. But what if she had done more? I rushed outside with her following behind like a shadow of chaos. The street was full of neighbors trying to help with rescues and information, but every movement stopped when they saw her and the storm brewing between us. We reached Karen's yard. Her massive antenna was leaning like a wounded animal, bolts loosened, grounding wires dangling. A screwdriver lay nearby, and a scorch mark marred the shingles beneath the mast. She had tried to repair or modify her illegal booster unit again, and judging by the burn marks, it had malfunctioned, dangerously. She spun toward the crowd, voice rising above the noise of generators and emergency crews. "He destroyed the communications system. He wants us helpless. But I can restore the signal. My antenna can protect us." Her daughter burst out the front door and ran to her, grabbing her arm. "Mom, stop. Please. You're wrong. You're hurting people." Karen snatched her arm away violently. "Don't you dare turn against me too. I'm the only one protecting this family." The girl stumbled back, tears cutting streaks through the dirt on her face. That's when a call came through my radio. Family trapped in rising water less than a mile from us. Their car pinned against a tree. They had minutes, maybe less. But if Karen destroyed my antenna before I could relay that call, that family would die. I started toward my house. Karen stepped in front of me. No. They need my signal. Mine. She lunged toward the base of her antenna and grabbed the grounding wire. Everything happened at once. A high-pitched hum vibrated through the metal. The booster flickered with blue sparks. Someone screamed for her to stop. Her daughter ran forward. I shouted for her to move back. But Karen wrapped both hands around the metal and yanked. A sharp burst of electricity ripped up the frame and into her arms. She convulsed, collapsing instantly. Neighbors rushed toward her. The smell of ozone clung to the air like burnt fear. Her daughter knelt beside her mother, crying and calling her name. I knelt beside them, checking Karen's pulse. It was erratic but present. She was conscious but dazed, staring upward as if the sky had betrayed her. I was trying to help, she whispered, voice fragile and crumbling. I know, I answered softly. But help isn't about being right. It's about being useful. Paramedics arrived within minutes, because I had already relayed their urgent route. They treated her quickly, loading her into the ambulance. Her daughter went with her, clutching her hand the entire way. When the sirens faded, the neighborhood turned to me. They didn't cheer. They didn't congratulate. They simply nodded with a quiet understanding that differed from earlier praise. This time, they didn't see me as the hero. They saw how thin the line was between calm and catastrophe. All because of one person's desperate need to feel powerful. I returned home and relayed the rescue call. The family trapped by the flood was saved. More calls came. More rescues followed. And by sunset, the county's system was patched enough that my antenna was no longer the single lifeline. I powered down the equipment, let the house fall into blessed silence, and sat on the porch watching the relief crews finish their work. Neighbors brought dinner over for me and the volunteers. Georgia hugged me and called me her guardian angel. The firefighters thanked me again. Even the HOA president came by, sheepish but sincere. We'll officially declare your property exempt from future interference, he said. No more complaints. No more petitions. The street owes you. I appreciated it, but I didn't need recognition. I just wanted peace. Days later, I learned Karen had been moved from the hospital to a mental health evaluation center. Charges were pending, but her condition mattered more now. Her daughter came to thank me, not for saving the antenna, not for winning the feud, but for not giving up on helping people even when one person tried to destroy me for it. She said, "Mom always thought helping others made you important. But she forgot that it only counts if you're actually helping." I nodded. Because that was the truth Karen never understood. Emergency equipment isn't dangerous. People who believe they are above consequences are. The antenna remained exactly where it always was, tall, silent, patient. An unsung sentinel for the next storm. A reminder that preparation isn't paranoia. It's responsibility. And every time I see it now, I remember the most absurd and exhausting battle of my life. The day a woman cut my emergency antenna, and then called 911 on me for trying to save her. Because in Karen's mind, chaos wasn't the enemy. Losing was.